Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fifth SOW Modern Change Lifecycle Launch and Learn session. Today we'll be focusing on multimodal change. Daniel Davidson will be the one walking us through a demo and presentation today. As always, please do not be shy if you have any questions. We do encourage you to use the Q&A function today as opposed to the chat, unless it is, something you feel that everyone needs to know. The Q&A function just allows us to track your questions a little bit better and answer them in a timely manner. And with that, I will hand it off to Daniel.
Hi there, everyone. So welcome to today's session. As just covering some housekeeping beforehand, I think Chris went through most of what's on this slide, but come off mute and ask questions if you want to. If that becomes slightly chaotic, then I think we might just structure things through going in the Q&A and asking questions. If you ask questions in the Q&A rather than the chat, we can make sure they're answered. Or, of course, raise your hand in Zoom, and someone will prompt me that someone's raised a hand, because I won't be able to see it because I'm presenting. If that's all right. Okay. First of all, safe harbor statement. Just read and absorb, because we may be talking about things that happen in the future, and we're talking with the best of our knowledge and with the best intentions, but as with all software, things change. Safe harbor slide there for that reason. This is now the fifth webinar we've done in this series. So we're covering aspects of change management as ServiceNow sees it and as ServiceNow has implemented it in the product. So the vendor's point of view on change management. And I think what's interesting is right now, we're probably sitting in the middle of what is one of the biggest shakeups in ITSM since I started working in IT a long time ago, which is a change in how change is done. And that's as a reaction to things that are happening around technology, things that are happening around the business, like digital transformation. And actually, one of the things that ties together a lot of the different features that we've shown in the other and concepts we've shown in the other webinars is multimodal change. We'll talk more about that as we go through, but what we allow you to do with multimodal, what we enable you to do, is to experiment, right? And use some of these new features in a way which is safe for your business, which is safe for your change process. And to do that in a way that really wasn't possible before with normal, standard, and emergency change. Okay. So we're going to talk through the evolution of change. This is a slide that has been at a few of the other webinars, I think, but it's an important kind of cornerstone, I think, to all the change webinars that we're doing. So at the start of the process, there was a situation where there wasn't really any control of change within IT. And so change control had to be put in place. And so that we decided as an industry that we needed to be able to have a structure around how change was managed. Later on, that was then standardized. So we started to have the idea of global processes, and that was change management. So frameworks like ITIL came along to manage change. And we've more or less been following them all along. And now we come to 2020 plus, and the business is now moving faster than ever before, and IT is more embedded in the business than ever before. The expectations around the velocity of change, the volume of change, and probably the compliance of change as well, and how we report on that, are greater than ever and more visible than ever. So actually, of all the ITSM processes, probably change is the one right now which has the biggest business impact, which is probably putting the most brakes on the business in terms of digital transformation. So it's really important that we think about change management, think about how it should be handled, and move to a change enablement paradigm. And one of the biggest questions that comes out at kind of CXO level when I talk to companies is, how do I federate whilst I maintain control? And a big part of what we're doing there happens in change management. So, how do we allow areas of the business to work in the way that they want to work, whilst we still may have a layer of centralized control that allows us to keep things stable, keep things within our compliance guidelines, make sure our regulators are happy, whatever the paradigm happens to be in the industry that you work in. I don't know if anyone kind of recognizes any part or all of this statement, but change velocity is handling high volumes of small incremental changes now, and they're exposing the weakness in change management. So change management is creaking if we do it the old-fashioned way. You can't expect developers who are doing 100 changes a day to come to a cab. right? And also the amount of overhead that implementing those procedures takes on our development teams is extremely costly for the business. It's costly not just in terms of the developers' time, because they're costly resources, but it's also costly in terms of our ability to change in the way the business wants us to change. Because if we don't change fast, if we're not agile, then competitors who are get the advantage, right? They're able to respond to market conditions, they're able to respond to their consumers, they're able to do what the business needs to do faster. And so that drives obsolescence and competitive obsolescence. So it has an underlying business impact. The ability to handle velocity, volume, and compliance within change has a business impact. And we have to do that in a way that doesn't compromise stability and governance. So a lot of sides to that envelope. If we build out a landscape, of change management, there's a lot of complexity up until the change process. And, we're seeing things in there. We're seeing repos, we're seeing different ways of working, SRE, DevOps, different degrees of maturity within DevOps. We're seeing CI/CD pipelines deploying things, and that could be on a daily basis, an hourly basis, or it could just be that we have automation around deployment and we're checking that before it goes into an environment for, say, our firewalls or our mainframe. We have automatic testing tools, and we then have an observability layer, and we have cloud, and we have on-prem still, and the mainframe hasn't gone away. There is a lot going on in there. And we need to be able to communicate across from these development teams, which are now quite fragmented often around the business, into operations teams, which are more often not centralized. And that gives us that DevOps stack, which again is part of the struggle with implementing true DevOps, is the handover from dev to ops. And sitting in front of that final safeguard, the grown-ups in the room, the change management, is the change process. And having CAB approvals in that change process, having manual approvals in that change process, either means that people have to shortcut the process, or we find creative ways of working with that process, or we slow things down, which isn't good. And what we need to take is a different approach to how we do change. And so multimodal change enables this different approach. So really, if we think of it as a hypothesis, at the moment, we're trying to serve all these different people doing different things in different ways. And we're trying to serve them with 3 changes, of which really there's kind of only 2 types of change, normal and emergent, normal and standard, because emergency change is just when we have either retrospective or low lead time. And that normal process has to jump through some hoops, and it involves a lot of manual process, a lot of manual triage. And it isn't taking into account that there may be a team that's shifted left, right, that are doing things on their side of the fence already. We don't need to do them again in the change process, but we may need to know about them for the change process. Or it may be they have some kind of instrumentation or telemetry or another system out there which enables us to run change in a different way, like site reliability engineering with error budgets. It may be that we just have an area of the business that doesn't need all those safeguards, right, like patching. And in order to make those teams work in an efficient way and not swamp the change team with changes, in order to have the ability to federate whilst maintaining control, we need to do things differently. And the hypothesis is that by allowing approvals and transitions to be conditional to that group, to allow us to tailor our changes to the way those groups work, we can increase velocity and volume whilst we also improve stability and governance, right? So we're pushing out on all areas of the envelope, and that's really important. But also we need to do this in a way which is scalable, which we can do and experiment. And I'm going to, if we get time towards the end of the course, I'm not sure we will, but I can go through an example of how we approach this talking to customers, and how we expect people not to move overnight and scrap normal standard emergency changes, but how actually multimodal in itself allows us to do things differently. And just as a quick kind of bit of history around multimodal, so mode 1 change, or mode 1 within IT is working in a way that you kind of know what's happening. So it's a very structured paradigm where what we do is facing known quantities. And actually within mode 2 change, what we're doing is more purpose driven. So within mode 2 change, we're being more flexible, allowing things to be more agile, allowing us to work within hypothesis and work within the areas of the business and be appropriate to what they need. So the multimodal change approach that we have is around being able to work within both of those paradigms. So we still have normal standard emergency change out there, but we're providing a new way that you can adopt at your own speed, at your own scale, to work in a different way, which is, again, be tailored to meet velocity, volume, and stability and governance within the appetite for risk of that bit of the organisation. And what that enables us to do is to build out a kind of happier picture than we had before, where we don't have a block at the end, where changes can flow through, where we're looking at the work that's already been done in our development pipelines and our automated testing tools and saying, you don't break stuff a lot and your processes are solid. And we've set some guidelines for you. We know you're following them. So we actually don't need to do much other than just grab information from you and make sure that's been done and you can do your changes. Or it may be that we have other types of changes which need that level of approval still. We may need manual approval because of some operational context, like a P1 incident right now. We may need that because just that system in itself doesn't have a lot of automation around how it gets things from the developers into the production environment. So we can tailor what we do to meet the needs of the team and the maturity of the team that's providing us with the changes, and then not slow them down. And also within that, if we have that information, if we're capturing that information for the change, we can also make it visible to the operations team. So we can hand over to operations something which tells them what the testing was, which tells them what was changed within that change. We can tell them, whether guidelines were adhered to or not, and how many changes a day are happening for that particular system. So it breaks down the barrier between dev and ops. What we're doing here is building out just an idea of how many different areas, within the business that we're responding to. So even within central IT, we have people doing things different ways. And you can see within cloud services, infra, patching, databases, they all will be making changes in subtly different ways. They're all following more or less a normal change process or a standard change process. And one of the problems is that a lot of changes kind of fall between the two of them, or maybe have facets which is catered for by none of them. And what we want to be able to do is tailor our services, our change services, to those teams. We have modern practices that we can bring into it. We have AI and ML, which we can use as a very good use case for AI and ML, is looking at the data that change provides. And the more we iterate with change, the higher volume of change. Obviously, volume is something which is a friend of AI and ML. So actually, we're taking something that previously was a disadvantage and turning it into an advantage and putting that layer on. And what Multimodal allows us to do as well is switch on some of these new features in a safe way for smaller parts of the business to prove whether they work and to understand and learn how they work, so that we can integrate it into a process in a way that allows us to move forward safely and then scale. And then outside of the business as well, outside the core IT, we have teams that are working in a distributed way. It may be that that one part of the business has decided to go out and hire its own DevOps team to do something, or maybe they're using a different cloud platform or a different set of technologies or a partner or vendor. Again, we need to be able to make sure that we can reach out to them and make sure that they're compliant, because they will be integrated with systems that we have most probably within the business. We will be probably responsible for anything that goes wrong with those systems ultimately. So we need to have a way in which we're working with distributed teams that are not necessarily part of the central IT paradigm in an appropriate way. And again, multimodal change allows us to go to those teams, to talk to them about what they're doing, to make sure they stay within the guardrails, and then to make sure the changes they make all conform to the guardrails, or maybe they have to seek a manual approval. So we're handling the velocity, we're increasing stability, and we're keeping governance in place. Okay, before we move on to some of the multimodal features in the demo, just one more slide on having some things. It's not the Wild West, right? We have things that you can use, but it isn't just as big as normal change, right? We have a set of states that you can use, and we have a set of approval rules that you can use, and we will monitor you in this way. And this is what we've seen before. And we make a contract with them to go through manual approval. And we can monitor their success, using things like success scores, which we covered earlier, or risk intelligence. We can see how risky they are and how successful they are. And by doing that, we're able to go out to different areas of the business and have an appropriate change for them to use. And again, it's reusable components that we're using for this. So we're able to identify where those teams can improve how they make changes. We can identify whether they need new data points, whether the CMDB needs improving for their area, whatever it is in their area that he's doing. We're able to see how they're making change. So we're able to see who's making change, and we're able to see the purpose of the change they're making. And the intersection of those two things allows us to really tailor change to them and understand what the issues are with their change. And so what it's ultimately about is change management stepping back a little bit to being kind of second and third line function. So allowing change to flow, setting up the changes to flow, delegating authority for the individual changes to those teams because they can provide us with data, but then stepping in where they need to, where there may be a manual approval that's needed, or also where they may be failing to make changes appropriately, or they haven't got the velocity they need. So we're monitoring the change process in the background using things like AI, machine learning, success scores. So again, stepping back to second and third line. So multimodal change. Traditionally, normal change in ServiceNow has a set of 7 steps, and every change flows through those steps. And there are slight variances, right? The workflow may vary slightly at different points, but it's one workflow end to end. And actually that causes us technical problems and it causes us process problems. It's not easy to have to change that process because everyone is using it, right? So if you want to change the change process, it can be a huge and costly operation. And that lack of the ability to kind of break things down and have smaller individual units that we're deploying out there for change means that it's more or less been impossible to change a change process in a large organization for the past 15 years that I've worked in this area. And so the way the state flows is already nailed down at the start in a normal change, and everyone has to use it. And so we then think of ways within that process that we can kind of slightly circumvent it, look at the risk and make them not go to account. But they're all small ways in which the change process changes from team to team. And what we need to do is think differently and think about what states other teams use when they're working, right? So for site reliability engineering, we might verify the error budget, implement and close the change, because that's what we need to do. If we're having an authorized change, we review before we authorize, right? A traditional change process, it's almost technically impossible to allow that to happen in a workflow in a way that's traceable. Cloud provisioning, again, just some other examples. Patching, a really good example too, where we have a patching program that's been done 100 times around the organization. It still needs to be on the change calendar. It's not a standard change. We still need to authorize it in some way, but we have a different state flow for patching. And as you can see in here, what we're doing is we're breaking change down, instead of being one big flow that goes end to end with 7 states, into a set of states that we can reuse. And all those states have things which are common to them. So those states have flows, those states have transitions, those states have data that we need. And so we can, as a change team, we can curate a set of states that we use, and we can string them together in a way that's appropriate for that area of the business. So we can go out to them and say, we've got some stuff, right? It's not whatever you want to do, but we've got some stuff we can reuse. And the auditors are happy with that as well, because by reusing those states, by understanding what a state means, again, it's not chaos. It's something that we can manage and maintain. And we can continue to use normal change as well in lots of areas of the business, because like I said, the mainframe is not going away, and maybe that still does use normal change. So we can start to experiment in some of these other areas and create efficiencies and drive efficiencies where we need them. So other things that we use within the multimodal paradigm, things like automatic approval, state conditions, policy-driven state models, there's a list there on the left-hand side. What we're able to do is we're able to experiment them within a certain model. So we're able to go out to a certain team who may be experiencing a lot of pain with the change process and say to them, we'll break you off from what we're doing in normal change or in standard change, and we'll give you a change type, and we'll monitor it closely, and we'll work with you, we'll understand how it works. And then when it works, and we're sure it works, we're measuring it works, we can then set that up for you, and you can go run with it. And we'll continue to monitor you in the background, and then we'll move on to another team. We'll work out how their change works. So what we're talking about is an area where you look at what the problem is, put a hypothesis together around how to fix it, work out how you're going to measure it, implement it, work out whether it works, and then scale it. And multimodal change allows you to do that in a way which doesn't mean you have to approach normal change and change it for everyone in one go. So that's why it's powerful, because it allows you to adopt a lot of the features that we have, that we've shown in the other parts of the webinars, in a way which is safe and in a way which is experimental, and allows you to prove the value of what you're doing. Okay, so first feature of next generation change to talk about is around what the end user gets, the end user of change gets, because what we're able to do with multimodal change is have a set of state transitions that allow the change to be driven through without intervention. So if certain data is filled in, we can allow the change to flow through. And so if certain conditions are met, the change will move forward. So someone out in IT will select a certain change, a change model, which is the purpose of the change. And they should only be able to select the change model which is appropriate for them. And we control that through a layer of role-based access. So it's like a change catalog, or it is a change catalog. But instead of just having standard changes in it, we have the changes that they should be able to make. And once we capture the information that we need from them in the change will then move on and follow a process appropriate to the purpose of that change. It may go through a traditional approval route. It may be that approval isn't needed because we collect the right data for the right systems around it, like in a DevOps paradigm or SRE. But it goes through an approval and authorization process as we'd expect it to. It may be that we layer on some operational data in there, right? It may be that patching can go ahead as a standard change, but if there's a P1 incident right now in a production system, you just want to not do some patching for a while, or you want some approval if you're going to do patching in that window. So what we're doing is we're able to mix that kind of paradigm of standard change, where you have a very purpose-driven kind of repeatable thing, with the idea that some authorization may be needed where appropriate. The implementation of the change carries out, and then we close the change, and it's all audited within the change. And how does that look? So in Service Operations Workspace, we're working to build out more and more of the experience around change. At the moment, you can go in and you can pick from a catalogue of changes, which again is driven towards the audience that's in that page at that time. And it shows them the state flow really clearly. And it only asks them to fill in a few fields, because actually the amount of fields on most organizations' change form is pretty overwhelming. And quite often during a given state, there's only 3 or 4 fields that you'd be expected to fill in. And it may be because of the type of change you're making due to integrations, there are fields which will be filled in later by an integration, into the DevOps tools or wherever. So we only ask them for the fields that they need to fill in at the time. So as it moves through, it may be assigned to different people, and they will be asked to fill in data on the changes it moves through. And if the data is filled in, if we capture that information, it's the right information, the change can automatically move from state to state. And that speeds up the velocity of change. It decreases the amount of work the change team need to do in terms of getting changes unstuck or moving them forward. And it allows users to be more in control of the change and understand more what they need to fill in at any given state. So we're being far more data-driven. One of the other components within multimodal change, as I said before, is breaking down the change flow from being one monolithic flow into being smaller flows for each state. And this has 2 advantages. First of all, you can use the states to do what they're meant to do with a flow, right? So you can chain states together in different orders, or you can skip states entirely without having to re-engineer your process. And the other thing that it allows you to do is most places where I've looked at someone's change process, especially in large organizations, I really struggle to understand the normal change process through looking at an end-to-end flow. Right? I can't understand what goes on. There's so many different branches and decisions that get made in it. I struggle to understand how it's properly kind of understood and tested, and sometimes people struggle to get changes through end-to-end in testing because there's so many nuances to that flow. And whereas that change flow can still exist within ServiceNow, we're not advocating for multimodal that you change that. You can start working in a different way with areas of the business that it's going to be valuable to. So yeah, a set of flows, we provide you the whole load of them out of the box that you can use, which is specific to the state. So when that state is entered, the flow fires and does what it needs to do for that state. We have state model definitions, and the state model definition will take a set of states and string them together in a way which is appropriate for that change. It may also preset some values within the change. And it also allows you to set the access within that change. So you can see in the middle of the security, and we have advanced security. You can use things like user criteria to say who can audience a change, or you can script it or whatever. So it's a flexible model that we have within role-based access. Within the model states, we can then, when we add the model state, we can then step forward and say how they flow. So for a given state transition, we can say what it can flow from and to, and what data we'd expect to see in that particular state to allow it to flow from and to that state. Okay, so they're the main components that we have within multimodal change. I'm going to skip to demo now, so just give me a second to swap my screens. Okay, so we're within my Utah instance, just looking at the list of change models, and you can see we provide some for you here out of the box. It's the same stuff as we just saw in the slide, so I'm just going to go through it on a live instance. But you can see in here we've got, if I go into the cloud infrastructure model, you can see we've got a couple of states in there. So we've created a definition of the change model. So this would be your purpose-driven change. And then the next thing we do is understand who we want to access that change. If I click on advanced security down here, we can see we can start using a familiar interface that's familiar from the catalog. I think knowledge as well, around who it's available for and not available for. And we're using user criteria for that. So we can also say who can edit that change. So if we really want to federate change out and allow them to change that change model, then that would be the group that could do that. We can have record presets because we know these fields are always filled out in a certain way for a certain model. And then kind of most importantly, we've got the model states that we flow to and from in here. So you can see in here, we can move from authorized to closed only for this type of change, or this model of change. Go back and pick a different one. Go into normal change, you can see a familiar state flow in here. And again, this is out of the box in ServiceNow. So you can see we can go from assess, there's a set of 4 states we can move to and from, and we define those state transitions. So actually, as part of the building of change, what we do is we take some components. We take the states, we take the state transitions, we take the user criteria if you can see it, and we put them together into a model. So although we can have potentially a lot of different models of change within a business, we're not looking after the components for all those things kind of all separately. It's something that's maintainable. We can reuse components in a way that allows us to reuse flows, allows us to reuse states, allows us to reuse state flows. Just looking at the change flow again in here, if I go to the Flow Designer, out of the box, we provide a whole load of different change flows. Actually, within the latest version that I haven't got on here of DevOps and change, we have DevOps flows in here too. So we've enabled, as of a couple of weeks ago, multimodal change for DevOps. So when your DevOps teams are making changes, when they're calling a change from their pipeline, and they're passing across the object which creates the change, they can now specify the model for that change. And potentially you could have DevOps teams using different models depending on what data they're providing, allowing the change to flow slightly differently. And also getting rid of that kind of awkward thing where you had a normal change with a category of DevOps, which didn't really make sense to me in terms of circumventing process. But so now you have a change which is fit for purpose, and you can understand when you raise the change, because you understand the model and you understand the team doing it, you can now look into those areas and see what the success of each one of those things are, and you can intersect them and give you a really good idea about what the chances of success of this change overall are. And you can look back and see the performance of teams or the performance of models and target continual improvement in that area. Have we got any questions so far, by the way? I haven't stopped to ask if how are we doing for questions and hands up? No one's interrupted me, so. We good, Chris?
We're banging through, Daniel, on the Q&A, bud.
Good.
Yeah. Please continue using the Q&A, guys. Really appreciate it. You're doing great, Daniel. Keep going.
Okay. If there's any boolean or anything like that, let me know. Just looking over at ServiceOps Workspace. So, you know, I've gone in as Laxmi here, who's a first line analyst. And although, hold on, my dialog window is slightly in the way here. If we go into one of the incidents, we can just start looking at what that experience looks like in change. So if I go to create a change request, again, we're talking about that catalog earlier where you see what your role should make you see for a change. So, Laxmi should be able to see a set of changes that she can select from a catalog. So these are the changes that we've set using role-based access for Laxmi to be able to see. And we can see in there already, you know, we've got normal change, right? The familiar normal changes in there too. But we've also got these things called pre-approved changes, which is kind of a new wording for standard change and allows us to step out of maybe a little bit about what standard change is slightly. And then we've got in here the cloud infrastructure change, which is our kind of true multimodal change. And if we click on that and go into it, we now have a far neater view of what's happening in that change request. We're only asked to fill in a couple of fields, and we have an idea about what the flow is of that change from within service operations workspace. So Lakshmi is now able to go in and drive the creation of change, knowing just what she needs to fill in and not being overwhelmed by a huge change form. And this, what we've got here in terms of the information she's got to fill in, is specific to that model of change. So we could be asking for more, right? If it's a more complex change, we could be asking for more at that point. But we're not constrained by just having one type of change called normal that she has to then work out what fields she has to fill in. Just going to go back to my presentation. Am I sharing the right screen here?
We're looking at your presenter view, but
Is that better?
yes.
That looks good.
It's what from last time. Okay, so skip forward. So just thinking about, what we do to make this real. And,
we're still looking at your presenter view, Daniel. Sorry about that.
Is that better?
Yeah, that was good.
So what we're looking around adopting mode 2 change is a kind of continuous loop of improvement, both within the changes themselves and within the business. So, what we've talked about and what we've done with customers who are looking to adopt this is not talk about a wholesale transformation of how the change process works. And that applies to whether we're talking about, the adoption of new features within change or multimodal change itself, because as I said before, multimodal change allows you to experiment, learn, and build out ways of working, and then scale those when you're confident of what they're going to do, which is really important for change management, because people don't survive long if they break change management within a business. So what we suggest doing is, identifying specific issues that you have with the change process, maybe for some specific teams, and then experimenting with new ways of solving those issues, understanding how to measure their success so that you're confident when you're doing them that what you're doing is successful and that you're not kind of just moving forward with something that hasn't worked. And you can pilot those improvements with small teams. So multimodal allows you to pilot those improvements in small ways without going across the business. And then when you've done that, you've got recipe books for scaling. So you can start working out who else could onboard to that mode of change, or maybe what the next mode of change you're building out looks like. And so those new ways of working can include things from multimodal, like the ability to engage with people on first line and present them in a catalog and have role-based access and the state transition and state flow that we showed. Or they could be that you're implementing features like advanced risk for change or success scores in that area only to see if it works. And then that enables you to prove that something works in that area while you're watching it closely. And when you know it works, roll it out to other areas of the business. And so, maybe think about, again, talk about a kind of main hypothesis around this. It's worth working out what you're trying to solve at the time you're trying to solve it. So when you're thinking about rolling out multimodal change, maybe just take one of the smaller problems you have, which could still be quite a big problem in itself. Just an example here would be that, in general, our management have lost the ability to accurately predict risk or impact within the change management space. And our hypothesis is that if we increase the quality of risk and impact assessment within change, we should be able to have faster, more stable changes. And so you would think about what features you can use within ServiceNow and maybe other things as well, wider things that could help you with that. And you would go out and discover what teams are suffering from this, where you might want to pilot this, work out what your plan is and your scope and what you're going to implement to do it, and then develop a set of patterns that allow you to test this and then scale it. So really, the first step is about understanding what the changes you're making, in the areas you're making, how those changes could be improved. And that could be something like CNDB data. It could be the actual change process itself. It could be using more automation, more AI, more machine learning. But when you've worked out what the root of the problems are, you then have to work out some metrics and baseline what you're doing. So, working out how you measure the success of the pilot that you're doing for that subset of the business. And then once you've done that, you can start to understand how multimodal change will be rolled out for them and pilot it in those areas and measure how successful it is. And then if it is successful, you can take the approaches that you've learned about, the new things you've learned about, and roll them out to the wider business. So, in summary, what multimodal change is allowing us to do is not only create something in itself that speeds up change, that allows you better measurement of change, that allows you a more modern way of working, that allows you to make your stakeholders of change happier because you're working in a way which is fit for them. It also allows you to experiment in a safe way, in a safe, small way, scalable way, with different areas of the business to work out how you change the change process overall and gradually move people off kind of monolithic normal change into a more appropriate change process for them. Thank you. We can do some Q&A now. Don't know if anyone has anything to add.
We have a question here from Aaron, and we're talking about site reliability engineering. So, Daniel, is there a reason why SRE change was included as a unique change model?
I think conceptually, right? So it doesn't have to be one unique model. The way in which SRE works follows a different state process to normal change, right? That's why it was included in that as an example. But you wouldn't have to have one model for SRE. You probably would start off with one model. You could have more, right? The point is that actually you start off with one and you pilot it with one team who are doing SRE, or two teams or three teams, which is, again, working out the scale of what you're doing. Work out how you measure whether it's going to be successful and try it with them, right? And lock it down so only they can use that type of change, only they can use that model. And then if it's successful, offer it to other teams who do SRE. And if those other teams need to work in a slightly different way, then maybe you need a new model. But that's the flexibility of it. It allows you to be in control, centralized control of what change is doing, whilst allowing a dialogue with other teams, with other pods around the business to make the change appropriate to them. Does that answer the question? You can come off mute and chat about it if you want, or not.
I guess so. I just don't. I wonder like how much sprawl you get, or you end up having if you are, creating like boutique change methods or change flows, and why you wouldn't try to control that by, because I think if allowed to, everyone would have a unique way to create a change or a unique way to process a change. I guess I don't totally follow why SRE wouldn't be just asked to comply with the normal process or a DevOps change, or like something of that nature. Why would we create a unique one, a boutique process for a specific group?
Those specific examples is because you've shifted left with those areas. So the process that they have has a set of guardrails that they should have, according to best practice, put up to make sure that they can move faster because they're providing data. And they're providing steps to the left of the change process, which traditionally the change process would have had to monitor in itself. So what you're doing is you're setting up a mode of change for them, which allows them to work within the guardrails that they've set up, prove that they're working within those guardrails, and work faster than the other teams who aren't. So that's why.
Got one right up your alley, Daniel. This question was written for you. What is your perspective on using multimodal change in a life sciences regulated environment and explaining this concept to a quality/regulatory organization? This is you.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's built for that, right? Because if you're in a regulatory organization, then it's almost impossible to change a change process. I've worked with a lot of them because first of all, it's going to cost you probably maybe millions, right? And I've seen millions quoted by Big Four to change the change process within that kind of space, financial services as well. What this allows you to do is to break off a pilot and say, we're going to accept some of the risks on this pilot, and we're going to mitigate those risks of doing things differently by having a high degree of contact with that team. So we're going to have risk owners who look at the changes and make sure that what we're doing within the pilot, when we move it to live for this small area, is closely monitored. And that's normally accepted as an approach to risk by regulators. And then, especially with the idea that after a short pilot, when you're happy that it's sticking within guardrails, you can then write up what that change, that particular type of change, who has access to it, because you can control that, and what the guardrails are. And actually, that change should be more stable than what you've done before because it's more purpose-driven. So you're saying, we know that they test because we've had a result from the testing tools, or we know that they work in this way, we're getting error budgets back from the SRE teams. Or we know they've shifted left, right, because their process is within SAP transports, right? So we know they're doing what they're doing over there because we can integrate with the data. So actually, it's a very powerful tool within regulated industries to make change flow faster, because you don't have to do it all at once. You can make sure that what you're doing within the small area you're experimenting with is closely monitored and then assured, and then it can be scaled out as you feel it's safe. And if there's any comments on that, I'm welcome to hear them.
Question from Matt here. So reporting, and Matt, I'm assuming we're talking like performance analytics. So how does reporting work on the models? Is it like the standard change catalog where you can easily check success rates?
So I'm not quite sure the scope of that question. So we have success scores for change modes, right? So there are two out of the box, or there are two success scores for change, right? That we implement. One is the team-based success, and the other is model-based success. And then from performance analytics point of view, it's a data point, right? So you have structured data around what model of change a change is. So you can report on it. You can slice and dice that data however you want. So I think the answer is, well, I know the answer is yes, but I'm not quite sure about the specific cases. I'm pretty sure the answer will be yes to that too. It's structured data. I'm not sure how much is out of the box in terms of PA.
Yeah, so with the standard change catalog, it actually adds a field to the change form called standard change template. And I think that's what's used to drive the success scores of each individual template. So I was wondering if the models would have something similar. Okay.
Yeah,
perfect.
they do. Yes, we have model success
Awesome.
within ITSM Pro.
Great. Thanks, guys.
You got it, Matt.
And we have a dashboard for that as well, out of the box in Pro. Okay.
Any other questions? Feel free to come off mute and just ask. We do appreciate how much everyone has been utilizing the questions and answers function as well.
All right. I think we've got everything answered in chat.
Have a quick question, actually, if you have a moment. It's a little bit tied to those flows, independent flows kicking off. So as we have moved into the change policies and looking at those flows, we've ran into a couple of hiccups where we would use the rollback functionality to be able to. So imagine, like, let me just paint a really fast scenario. Your change just got approved, but on the second step, somebody, rejected it. And some of the information changed, which means we probably want that first team to know about those changes because maybe they wouldn't have approved it in the first place. What do you suggest would be the best way on the rollback piece of that? Or have you seen people struggling in that situation?
I have seen lots of people struggle with rolling back change, and not from a technical point of view, from a process point of view of actually what happens, right, and how you handle that. I'd say that a couple of things are appealing about multimodal. One is that the state flow is controlled and the flows for each state fire when the state fires, right? So if you roll a change back, previously with a change flow, you'd have to implement an end-to-end flow, potentially actively implement what happened when it rolled back to any stage before that stage, within the flow. And you'd have to kick off the earlier stages at that point. Whereas now when you re-enter a stage, it should kick off a fresh flow for that stage. So it just seems much simpler from an implementation point of view to have the flow defined at the state rather than end to end, because you don't run into so many issues with having to loop back.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the part that like very specifically, and we can sidetrack this. We can have a side chat, was more about like the flow contexts. So you have multiple flow contexts running now versus one perhaps before. And so if you needed to go back to that first layer of approval, it's kicking off now multiple contexts and kind of struggling with that piece of the process. So interesting what you just said. Let me chew on that, and then maybe I can hit you guys up on the side.
Yeah.
Talk through it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Quick question. Are there any accelerators available in the impact program for using multimodal change, or any good documentation or examples outside of this presentation that you could recommend? I provide my change team.
So we have some good documentation on docs around technically how it works. I've worked with a couple of impact customers on large impact customers on rolling this out, and I think there's been some information out there. It's not something I'm particularly familiar with. I think that, you know, as this is adopted and as there's a demand for it, I'm sure we'll see some more stuff being built. But have a look in Now Create. There's definitely some documentation there. But
Okay.
Colleague of mine, Scott Gamble, writes that stuff. So, you know, if there's a demand for it, I'm sure it'll be there if it's not already.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. Great job, by the way.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Okay.
Just
Any more?
a question on migration process. Do you see, you say you worked with several customers, do you see them converting their normal change into a modal change kind of as a first step, or do you see them starting with, you know, creating different models for, you know, point use cases and kind of going from there, and then kind of coming back around to kind of everything else later?
So no, I haven't seen them move to normal as a model yet. The most common thing I've seen is people who are on Flow Designer for normal change, so not using workflow anymore. And I think that makes things a little bit easier because you're not kind of battling two technologies there as a dev team, your ServiceNow dev team. And then it gives you a route to maybe move to convert normal change into a model. And I think that would be something to do as well. But generally, we've headed off to do patching. Patching is a good example because it tends to be, you know, in the grand scale of things, fairly low risk. It's an area that needs to have a different type of change. It's high volume, so there's a fairly big payoff for implementing a mode of change for patching with relatively little risk. I think now that we've got the DevOps multimodal change stuff in there, there's a great hook to use multimodal change for DevOps and do that integration too, because DevOps are screaming out for multimodal change. And I think, especially with more SRE integration coming into ServiceNow, again, that's an area that I see probably people using. Another appealing one is SAP changes, because generally speaking, SAP teams are using change management within the SAP software stack, building transports, and then really just doing release through change in ServiceNow, and more or less. So those are the areas that I see them building out. And to answer your question directly, they leave normal change as a flow, let people use it, and then build out these other things so they understand multimodal change a bit later. But the aspiration is to move the whole lot across, yes, but they're just not there yet.
Any other questions? I see one from Susan Williams. Daniel, I don't know if you see that in chat, but she asked, we migrated all of our CR types to equivalent models for normal, standard, and emergency. And at the same time, we created a new informational MMCR. There's a migration tool we use to do this. There is a post on community that explains how to use that migration tool.
Oh, cool. Share the post. I haven't seen that. So is that a third party thing? Does anyone know? Has anyone else seen that?
I haven't seen that, Daniel, just speaking from the engineering perspective, but I've encountered quite a few customers who have shifted onto models and they've just one for one switched their type for models to get going.
Yeah.
And then they've slowly started to add a few more and break up the old, if you like, old school established types into models that suit their business case.
Yeah.
That's building up.
Yeah, I'd say over the last few months, there's definitely been, when you visit customers, there's been a good chance they will have implemented multimodal change and they will be using models for things. Whereas, you know, if you went maybe a year ago, I didn't really find that many, if any at all. So it's something that's gathering a bit of momentum, I think, and pace. Oh, one more question popped up. So there's some documentation that we've got on the API. I think it uses the same API as normal change, isn't it? It's just a change API that it uses. Chris, I think that's.
I'm sorry, what was that, Daniel?
I was just saying that there's a REST API for multimodal change, or does it use the normal API endpoints?
It uses the normal API endpoints.
Yeah.
So nothing specific. If you're hitting change from a REST point of view, the same endpoints work behind the scenes. If you're using the older types, it'll work. If you're using new models, it'll work.
Yeah, the models is just a field on the change. So
yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we are good. Susan, I'll keep the chat open, so if you do find that link, you can send it within the next couple minutes here. But I will go ahead and stop recording. Thank you everyone for joining and for being so active in the chat today. Our next call will be on August 30th, and it will be covering DevOps. So if you have any questions between now and then, feel free to reach out to me personally. Please expect the recap email, which will include the deck from today as well as the recording within the next 48 hours or so. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.